Hello everyone, Peter Cook here. I'm the Programs Director with the North Berrien Historical Museum in Coloma, Michigan. I'm here today to talk to you about Crystal Palace, which was a dance hall that was once located on Paw Paw Lake in Coloma, Michigan during the height of the resort era. A dance hall, quite simply put, is a hall for dancing. They were popular from the earliest parts of the 20th century through the early 1960s, at which point nightclubs and discotheques took over as venues for that kind of entertainment. This is a painting of the ballroom at Crystal Palace, and as you can see, in dance halls, live musicians perform for the patrons who were dancing the night away. In nightclubs and discotheques, you have a DJ who's spinning pre-recorded music for the people dancing. Not quite the same as having the musicians in the same room as the dancers. The music of dance halls was also very different. We're talking jazz music, the big band era, swing music, and how that developed throughout the first half of the 20th century. This happened to coincide with the resort era on Paw Paw Lake. In the early parts of the 20th century, people began coming from Chicago, Illinois during the summer to escape the city heat. First they were on the Lake Michigan beaches. They gradually found their way to Paw Paw Lake and the countryside around it and found it very relaxing, very calming, very soothing. This is the era before air conditioning, so people were just trying to find a nice, cool, calm, quiet, relaxing place, getting away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. To accommodate all of this tourism, many hotels, resorts, and dance halls began popping up around Paw Paw Lake. Crystal Palace was the biggest of the dance halls. It was built in 1925 in the spring. It was scheduled to open on April 25th, and about 1 week prior to that date, on April 19th, it mysteriously burned to the ground. Arson is the suspected cause of the fire, meaning it was done intentionally. Fortunately, the community rallied together and in just 5 weeks managed to rebuild an even bigger and better Crystal Palace. So on May 30th, Crystal Palace opened its doors. That is incredible that the community could rally together and reopen it that fast. That's a real testament to the strength of the community. Conveniently, Crystal Palace was located between Chicago and Detroit, two major cities that are going to attract traveling musicians. Additionally, the owner of Crystal Palace, a man by the name of Frank DeLuey, happened to have connections at MCA Booking House. So he was able to secure some of the major national touring acts of the day to perform at Crystal Palace. One of the most famous of those musicians was a man by the name of Louis Armstrong. Many people know him as Louis Armstrong or Satchmo. Very popular singer, band leader, trumpeter. He was originally from New Orleans, born in 1901. He had moved to Chicago in the early 1920s. He just became one of the major musical figures of the 20th century. He performed at Crystal Palace for the first time in 1956. And it's said that when he originally showed up, he said to owner Frank DeLuey, "What are you doing booking my band out in the sticks?" You know, he's used to playing Chicago, New York, big cities. He thought he was in the middle of nowhere and no one was going to show up to his performance. Well, to his surprise and delight, 2,200 people showed up that night. He laughed about the great crowd out here in the sticks and had such a good time that he came back a total of 5 times between 1956 and 1960, basically once a year. So it's very cool that we had a legend like Louis Armstrong performing in Coloma at Crystal Palace. Now before I talk about a couple other musicians who performed at Crystal Palace, I just want to mention that a man who worked as a bouncer, security, at Crystal Palace named Frank Rearis, he collected autographs, signatures of many of the musicians who performed there. Those were collected in an autograph album, and his family, his daughter Roseanne Bittner and her family recently donated that book of autographs of famous performers who were at Crystal Palace to the North Berrien Historical Museum. So thank you very much to the Rears family, Roseanne Bittner and her sisters. Very cool piece of memorabilia to have in our collection. I'm going to just talk about a couple of those real quickly. Of course, this is the days before camera phones. Nowadays people meet famous people and they take selfies to show that they were with that famous person. Back then you got autographs, and it's great if you had a photograph of the musician. I'm sure these musicians carried these around with them to sign autographs. This is a man by the name of Lawrence Welk, who was a very popular accordionist and television host, born in 1903 in North Dakota. His education stopped in the 4th grade when he left school to work on his family farm. He did decide while doing this that he wanted to grow up to become a professional musician, so he persuaded his father to order a mail order accordion that cost $400. Now we have to remember inflation. $400 might not sound like a huge amount of money nowadays, but inflation, the increase in cost of things, and the fall in purchasing value of money, that accordion nowadays in 2020 would cost $5,000. Whoa. So he had to convince his father that this was going to be a worthwhile investment and promised to work on the family farm until he was 21 years old. On his 21st birthday, having fulfilled that obligation, he left home and began performing on radio programs in North and South Dakota. This really developed big time into the Lawrence Welk Show on television, which he hosted from 1951 to 1982. And we have to remember this is before the internet, so televisions were the major form of entertainment in households in the United States. So he was a fixture of many households, Lawrence Welk. And this simply says, "To Frank, Lawrence Welk." So that's very cool. I'm going to talk about one more musician who has a little bit more of a regional, a Michigan connection, and that is Millie Curry. She was later in life Millie Erickson when she got married. She was a singer and actress, born on Christmas Eve 1927 in Ohio. When she was very young, she moved with her family to Detroit, Michigan. Her father ran a grocery store there. She began professional singing in the late 1940s. She performed with band leaders such as Tommy Dorsey, Ray Anthony, and Chuck Foster in his orchestra. That's who she's actually performing with at Crystal Palace. And this says, "To Frank, sincere best wishes, always, Millie Curry." She was also an actress. She was in musicals, she was on radio, she was in a few movies and television shows later in life. She was also a pilot. She had a real estate license. She even had her own photo retouching business. Millie Curry did it all, and it's cool that she has some Michigan connections. She eventually moved to Los Angeles. But yeah, Millie Curry. And that's the last of the musicians that I'm going to talk about who performed at Crystal Palace. There are many, many more, but just wanted to talk about a few today, talk about the photograph album that the Rears family donated to us. So it helps save the legacy, preserve the legacy of Crystal Palace for future generations. It's a very important part of Berrien County history. So that said, I think that we're going to wrap things up there for today. Once again, I am Peter Cook, Programs Director with the North Berrien Historical Museum. Thank you very much for spending just a little time with us today. Have a wonderful one. We'll talk to you later. Bye.